Sometimes life teaches you its biggest lessons in the quietest ways. For a long time, I honestly thought my stability, my predictability, was a problem. Turns out, it was my superpower. I'm Michael, I'm 32, and I work as a mechanical engineer in Oregon. And if you're picturing a guy whose life is as structured as his blueprints, you'd be pretty spot on. I've got a 3-bedroom house I bought when I was 28, a big, goofy dog named Max who's basically my shadow, and most weekends you'd find me either out on the trails, or elbow deep in some home improvement project. That's just what I do. It relaxes me. I know. It probably sounds like I'm describing the most generic guy on the planet. But here's the thing, I genuinely liked my life. I had a clear career path, my finances were in order, and I could actually afford a vacation without needing a spreadsheet and a second mortgage. My friends used to joke that I was the dad friend, the one with jumper cables, who knew how to fix a leaky faucet at 2 a.m. I never thought that would be a problem. Then I met Brianna. We'd been together for 3 years when everything started to go sideways. And for most of that time, it was good. Really good. We met at a barbecue a coworker threw, and she was just easy. Easy to talk to, genuinely kind, always laughing at my terrible jokes. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office, lived in an apartment with her roommate, but spent most nights at my place because, as she put it, my house actually felt like a home. She'd bring Max treats, cook dinner while I tinkered in the garage, and we'd watch movies on the couch like a completely normal couple. For a long time, I truly thought we were building towards something real. The first crack in the foundation, it showed up so slowly, so subtly, I didn't even see it. Brianna had this friend group, right? They were different. Unemployed musicians, bartenders working a few nights a week, people living in vans and calling it freedom. Not bad people, just not my scene. I didn't have a problem with them, but she started spending more and more time with them. And when she'd come back, she'd have this distant look, like she'd just experienced something I could never possibly understand. Then the little comments started. Innocent at first. She'd talk about a friend who bought a motorcycle and just took off for Arizona, no planning, nothing. Or another guy who quit his job to follow his band on tour, and wasn't that just so brave and romantic? I'd nod along, not really getting it, because to me, those stories sounded less like bravery and more like a financial crisis waiting to happen. But the comments got more pointed. Maybe we should be more spontaneous, she'd say, almost to herself. Maybe we should take a random road trip in the middle of the week. Maybe I should stop planning everything down to the minute. I tried. I really did. I took her on surprise weekend trips. I'd skip my usual Saturday morning routine to do whatever she wanted, but it was never enough. Because I couldn't fundamentally change who I was. I'm the guy who checks the weather before a hike, who schedules oil changes in advance, who actually reads instruction manuals. That's just how my brain works. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Completely out of nowhere. I'd just gotten home from work, planning to install some new shelves in the garage, and Brianna was on the couch with this look on her face I'd never seen before. She didn't even let me put my bag down before she said, "We need to talk." I sat down. Max immediately came over, put his head on my knee like he sensed something bad was coming. She just stared at me for what felt like forever. And then she told me. She said I was too nice. Not as a compliment, but as a flaw. Like being considerate and stable was ruining her life. She needed someone with more edge, someone who made her feel alive, someone who didn't have a color-coded calendar and a retirement plan at 32. I asked her if there was someone else. I'm not stupid. The way her face changed told me everything before she even opened her mouth. His name was Caleb. 29, played bass in a band called Broken Pavement that played open mics and dive bars. And apparently, he represented everything I wasn't. She said he was exciting, that he lived in the moment, that being around him felt like anything could happen. I just sat there, processing the fact that my 3-year relationship was ending because I had my life together. She packed her stuff that night. I didn't try to stop her. Honestly, what was I supposed to say? She wanted chaos, and I offered stability. You can't compromise on something that fundamental. The weirdest part was, she seemed almost disappointed that I wasn't freaking out, like she expected me to beg or yell. Instead, I helped her carry boxes to her car, gave back her spare key, and watched her drive away. Max sat next to me on the porch, and I remember thinking, at least my dog will never leave me for a bass player. The next few weeks were strange. I threw myself into renovating my bathroom, because destroying tile with a sledgehammer is surprisingly therapeutic. My friends were baffled when I told them why Brianna left. My best friend couldn't wrap his head around the idea that being reliable was a deal breaker. I wasn't heartbroken in a dramatic sense, I was more confused than anything. Like I'd been rejected from a job I was perfectly qualified for. I kept thinking about that phrase, too nice, and wondering when basic human decency became something people ran away from. But I didn't chase her. I didn't text her. I just kept living my boring, predictable life, completely unaware that Brianna's exciting new adventure was about to turn into a complete disaster. Here's the thing about watching someone's life fall apart from a distance: you get the information in pieces, like a puzzle you never asked to solve. And by the time you see the full picture, it's often too late for them to fix it. About 3 weeks after Brianna left, I started hearing things through mutual friends. The kind of details that trickle down through social circles, whether you want them to or not. Caleb, the exciting bass player with all that edge Brianna was looking for, turned out to be exactly the guy you'd expect from someone who called their band Broken Pavement. He was 29, worked part-time at a music shop, and I use the word worked very generously because apparently he called in sick twice a week. He didn't have his own place, he'd been couch surfing for a year, rotating apartments like some kind of nomadic musician stereotype. His band played open mic nights and the occasional dive bar gig where maybe 15 people showed up, and half were there for the cheap beer, not the music. And here's the kicker: Brianna, the girl who left me because I was too stable, was now bankrolling his entire existence. The information came in waves, and I wasn't even looking for it. One of my friends grabbed coffee with Brianna's former roommate, and apparently, Brianna had moved in with Caleb at his friend's apartment. Except Caleb didn't pay rent because he was between opportunities. Brianna was covering his half, plus groceries, plus gas, because Caleb's van was constantly breaking down. My friend told me this like it was the most predictable thing in the world. And honestly, it kind of was. Another friend saw them at a bar where Caleb's band was playing, and Brianna was sitting alone, looking absolutely miserable, while Caleb flirted with girls between sets. The same guy who supposedly made her feel alive was treating her like a walking ATM with the personality of a houseplant. But I didn't reach out. I didn't offer advice. I just kept demolishing my bathroom and planning out the tile work like a normal, boring person who actually finishes projects. Then I ran into her at Lowe's on a Saturday morning. That's when I realized how bad things had actually gotten. I was in the plumbing aisle, trying to figure out which wrench I needed for my sink, and I heard my name from behind me. I turned around and barely recognized her. Brianna had lost weight, not in a healthy way, but in a way that made her look exhausted and worn down, like she hadn't been sleeping or eating properly in weeks. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she was wearing an oversized hoodie that definitely wasn't hers, and she had these dark circles under her eyes. She tried to act casual, asked me what I was working on, and I told her about the bathroom renovation, because what else was I supposed to say? She lingered there in the aisle way longer than necessary, clearly wanting to have some kind of deeper conversation. But I kept my answers short and polite, because I already knew where this was heading. She mentioned she was there buying light bulbs because the fixtures in her apartment were broken. Not their apartment, which told me everything about how that living situation was going. I made an excuse about needing to grab something from another section, and I got out of there before she could ask me for help or advice or whatever she was building up to. That encounter stuck with me for days. Not because I felt bad for her, but because I couldn't believe this was the same person who told me I wasn't exciting enough. A week later, the messages started. First, Instagram likes on old photos. Then comments on posts I'd made months ago. The kind of digital breadcrumbs people leave when they're testing whether you'll respond. I didn't. Then came the texts, casual at first, asking how Max was doing, saying she missed him, which was obviously code for saying she missed me without actually saying it. I kept my responses minimal, 1 or 2 words, enough not to be rude, but not enough to open a door. Then one night, my phone rang at almost midnight. I was in bed reading, Max sprawled across half the mattress, and I saw Brianna's name on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. Maybe curiosity, maybe some leftover sense of obligation from 3 years together. The second I said hello, I heard crying on the other end. Not quiet tears, but full-on sobbing, the kind where someone can barely catch their breath. She tried to explain what happened, but the words came out in fragments. Caleb had spent their rent money on a vintage guitar he found on Craigslist. They'd gotten into a massive fight. He'd called her controlling and stormed out, and now she didn't know where he was or how she was going to pay for the apartment. She tried calling him 17 times. No answer. Then she said something that actually made me angry. Not sad, just genuinely frustrated with how predictable this whole situation was. She said, "You always knew what to do." I missed that. Like I was some kind of instruction manual she'd thrown away and now wanted to dig out of the trash. I took a breath, stayed calm, and told her exactly what she needed to hear, but probably didn't want to accept. I said she needed to talk to her landlord, figure out if she could break the lease or find a roommate, and maybe stop expecting a 29-year-old guy who sleeps on couches to suddenly become financially responsible. I did not offer to help. I did not offer money. I did not offer to co-sign anything or let her crash at my place. I gave her practical advice the same way I'd give directions to a stranger. And then I told her I had to go because I had work in the morning. She asked if we could meet up and talk in person, and I said no. Simple as that. No explanation, no softening the blow. The calls kept coming over the next few weeks. Not every night, but often enough that I started letting them go to voicemail. She'd leave messages asking me to help her find a new apartment, asking if I knew anyone renting, asking if I could review a lease agreement because she didn't understand the legal language. Every request was wrapped in this tone of desperation that made it clear she'd realized she'd made a massive mistake, but was too proud to say it out loud. I didn't respond to any of them. Then the messages stopped completely. And through the grapevine, I found out why. Caleb had disappeared. Not in a dramatic way, he just stopped coming back to the apartment and blocked Brianna on everything. She got evicted because she couldn't cover the full rent on her own. And now she was sleeping on her friend's couch, the same friend she used to live with before she moved in with me all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Brianna had traded a 3-bedroom house with a yard and a dog for a couch in a 1-bedroom apartment. All because she wanted someone with edge. And now she was learning the hard way that edge doesn't pay bills or show up when things get difficult. And me? I just kept working on my house, kept hiking on weekends, kept living my boring, predictable life, completely unaware that the universe was about to hand me exactly what I needed. The thing about moving on is that it doesn't announce itself with fireworks or a dramatic moment of clarity. It just happens quietly while you're focused on other things. One day, you realize you haven't thought about your ex in weeks. That's exactly how Chloe entered my life. No grand romantic gesture, no love at first sight, just a regular workday that turned into something I never saw coming. I was about 2 months past the Brianna situation. My bathroom renovation was finally done, and I'd gotten pulled into this commercial development project at work that required collaboration with a landscape architecture firm. There were maybe 12 people in the kickoff meeting, and Chloe was one of them, sitting across the table with a portfolio full of detailed site plans and this confident way of presenting ideas that made it clear she knew exactly what she was talking about. She ran her own landscape architecture company, had been doing it for 6 years, and the way she discussed drainage systems and soil composition with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for talking about their favorite sports team told me everything I needed to know about her work ethic. We ended up working together pretty closely on that project. Lots of emails back and forth about grading issues and retaining wall specifications. The kind of technical conversations that probably sound boring to most people, but felt completely natural to us. She had her own house about 20 minutes from mine, she was renovating her kitchen, and when I mentioned I'd just finished a bathroom remodel, she actually asked specific questions about tile adhesive and grout sealing instead of just nodding politely like most people do. About 6 weeks into the project, we grabbed coffee after a site meeting, and that conversation lasted 3 hours without either of us noticing. She told me about how she'd started her business right out of grad school, how she bought her house as a fixer-upper and had been slowly transforming it, how she had 2 rescue dogs that were absolute chaos but she loved them anyway. I told her about Max, about my hiking trips, about how I'd spent the last few months working through a breakup by destroying walls with a sledgehammer. She laughed at that, not in a judgmental way, but in this understanding way that made it clear she got it. Then she said something that hit me harder than I expected. She said, being boring is underrated. Reliability is attractive. Not as some kind of pity compliment, but as a genuine observation, like she'd figured out something most people spend their whole lives missing. We started dating officially about a week later. And the difference between being with Chloe and being with Brianna was like comparing a professionally built house to one held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. Chloe didn't need me to be spontaneous or edgy or whatever Brianna had been searching for. She just needed me to show up and be consistent, which was literally the only thing I'd ever been good at. We'd plan weekend trips months in advance. We'd text each other about contractor recommendations and building code requirements. And somehow that felt more romantic than any random midnight adventure ever could. Her friends were architects and engineers and project managers, people who understood that having a 5-year plan wasn't boring, it was smart. About 4 months into dating Chloe, so around 6 months after Brianna left, I ran into Brianna and Caleb at a grocery store. And that encounter pretty much summed up everything that had happened. Chloe and I were there together, picking up stuff for dinner, having one of those easy conversations about whether we should try a new recipe or just make pasta. We turned down the produce aisle and there they were, Brianna and Caleb standing in front of the organic apples, having what was clearly an argument about money. Caleb looked exactly like you'd expect, ripped jeans, faded band t-shirt, this perpetually exhausted expression of someone who'd been couch surfing for too long. Brianna looked better than she had at Lowe's, like she'd gotten some sleep and started eating again. But there was this hardness in her face that hadn't been there before, like life had spent the last few months teaching her lessons she didn't want to learn. They both saw us at the same time, and I watched Brianna's entire body language change. Her eyes went from Caleb to me, then to Chloe, and you could literally see her doing the math in her head, comparing where she ended up versus where I ended up. Caleb, being the absolute genius he was, decided to say something. He looked at me, smirked, and said, "Still boring, I see." Chloe, without missing a beat, looked him up and down and said, "Still broke, I see." I didn't say anything. Just put my arm around Chloe and kept walking. But I heard Brianna snap at Caleb behind us. Something about him making everything worse. I never found out what happened after that because I genuinely stopped caring. The rest fell into place exactly how it should have. Chloe and I moved in together about 8 months after we started dating. Bought a house that needed work, but had good bones. Exactly the kind of project we both loved. Max got along great with Chloe's dogs, and our weekends became this perfect routine of hardware store runs, hiking trails, and working on renovation projects together. We got married a year later. Small ceremony, nothing fancy, just the people who actually mattered. Through mutual friends, I eventually heard that Brianna had moved back in with her parents, got a more stable job working at a medical office, and was dating some guy who worked in finance. Good for her. Honestly, I hope she figured out what she actually wanted. Caleb, as far as I know, is still sleeping on couches and playing dive bars, still waiting for his big break that's never going to come, because talent without discipline is just expensive noise. And me? I'm living in my boring, predictable house with my wife who thinks reliability is attractive. Working on boring engineering projects and planning boring vacations 6 months in advance. And I've never been happier. What I learned from all this is that bad boys might give you stories, but good men give you a future. Brianna wanted excitement and got chaos. Wanted edge and got instability. Wanted someone who lived in the moment and got someone who couldn't plan past next weekend. Meanwhile, I just kept being exactly who I'd always been. And somehow that turned out to be exactly what the right person was looking for all along. The universe has a weird sense of humor like that. You spend years thinking your stability is a flaw, that being responsible and reliable makes you invisible, and then someone comes along who sees those exact qualities and thinks they're the most attractive things about you. Chloe didn't want me to change or be more spontaneous or develop some kind of mysterious edge. She wanted me to keep being the guy who checks the weather before hiking and reads instruction manuals and has a retirement plan at 32. She wanted boring, and I gave her boring, and somehow we built something real out of it. The last I heard about Brianna was actually from her mom, which was probably the strangest twist in this entire story. About a year after everything went down, I got a message on Facebook from Brianna's mom saying she wanted to thank me for not taking Brianna back when she tried to come crawling back. She said Brianna needed to learn that actions have consequences and that excitement isn't a substitute for partnership. She said I'd always been good to her daughter and she was sorry about how things ended. I didn't respond because what do you even say to that? But it was weirdly validating to know that even Brianna's own mother recognized how ridiculous the whole situation had been. So yeah. My girlfriend told me I was too nice, left me for a guy with edge, and 6 months later she was sleeping on couches while I was living my best life. Not because I changed or became someone I wasn't, but because I stayed exactly the same and waited for someone who actually appreciated that. Being boring isn't a bug, it's a feature, and the right person will see that. The wrong person will leave you for a bass player who can't pay rent. And honestly, that's the best favor they could ever do for you. Do you think there's a difference between excitement and chaos?